This is Ralph Lemmel, and today I would like to present some demonstration concerning API usage analysis. So we are going to pick a specific API and a specific implementation of the 101 company system, and we want to understand how that API is used in that implementation. In fact, I'm going to pick the JDOM API, which is a DOM-like API. That is an API for in-memory XML processing. In fact, this is an API for Java, and we're going to pick the 101 implementation called JDOM, fittingly because it's designed to exercise the JDOM API. This is a very simple implementation of the 101 company system, only covering a few features. So let's have a look at the wiki page. So you see it only uses two languages, namely XML for data representation and of course Java for the actual code. And it's essentially an Eclipse-based implementation. And worth pointing out is the fact indeed that it uses the JDOM API. So in terms of the features, it deals with the tree structure of companies. It deals with the type-driven query for totaling salaries and with the type-driven transformation for cutting salaries. So let's have a look at the source code, because this also helps us to get sort of familiar with the JDOM API, for which we then want to understand how it is used within this implementation. So here on the GitHub page, we see all the files for the implementation. We also see the sample XML tree that we might query or transform. This is, as you know, this is this kind of XML tree for a company. There's also a schema, which we don't use here much because we use a generic XML API, but nevertheless, this schema defines the kind of XML trees that we are dealing with. And all the source code is placed in this folder here. So you see we have a Java class for totaling salaries, a Java class for cutting salaries, and then there's this tests class. So let's look at total just to get an idea. This also helps us understanding the API a little bit and kind of anticipating what we want to do when we analyze API usage. Yes, so this is the operation total. So it essentially takes a document, returns a double, and you see we import a number of types here from the JDOM API. So we deal with documents, we deal with elements, and we also deal with element filters as far as queries are concerned. And now here you see that we set up an iterator based on the descendants axis, so that we get our hands on all the salary elements within the given document. So indeed we iterate over these elements, and then for each such element we extract the text from the element, which we hope to be a double, that is the salary value. So we aggregate all the salaries. This is what we do. And essentially we see here the API parts that we invoke: descendants axis, get text, okay, and the types, document, element filter, element. Okay. So now we want to indeed perform API usage analysis for this implementation relative to the JDOM API. That is, we want to know what parts of the implementation use the API. So we have several classes. Which of these classes use the JDOM API? We also want to know what types and methods of the API are used, right? So JDOM API is a pretty big API. So we want to know precisely what types and methods of the API are used. And then if you look at this situation, perhaps we can observe some sort of usage profile in terms of how that implementation uses that API. So we can perform API usage analysis in many ways using all kinds of techniques, tools, approaches. We can visualize it in all kinds of ways. This slide here is based on work by the Shift Lab team, and in particular Victor Winter from University of Nebraska at Omaha. what we see here is the result of an automated API usage analysis, which shows what parts of the implementation depend on what types of the JDOM API. So basically all the white nodes or classes of the implementation, or the gray nodes or types of the JDOM API. And as we clearly see, for example, the tests class essentially only depends on document, because of course it has to load a document for which it uses the sucks builder type, whereas the cut and the total classes, which actually query and transform, they also deal with the element type and with the element filter type. Okay, now we can imagine that we can also ask more specific questions, not just about types, but we could now also look at methods. So here's actually an automatically extracted list of methods and constructors used by the implementation at hand. So we see that we use the getDescendants method to indeed retrieve all the elements, using element tag salary. And we also see that we have used the methods getText and setText to manipulate the text of salary elements. And further, we see that we only use the constructor for one specific type here, element filter, which is the type to construct the filter for queries. So we don't construct elements and attributes, which means we clearly see from this that we face a sort of a usage profile such that we only query, and perhaps as far as setText is concerned, mutate XML trees, but we do not construct them. Okay, so I mean, this was just a short introduction to API usage analysis. Obviously, this was a really trivial example, just a very tiny implementation, just very little use of one specific API. In our team, we study the problem of API usage analysis and also related problems such as API migration quite intensively. Please have a look. And it's not just our work, you also find pointers to various other research teams working on API usage analysis. So let me summarize this presentation. I meant to demonstrate the meta-level value of the 101 Companies project in the sense that by this example, we see that a collection of many implementations exercising many languages and technologies is quite interesting from a reverse engineering point of view. We can analyze such a corpus and learn many things and exercise many techniques operating at the meta level. Specifically, this example was so simple, in terms of the complexity of the implementation, in terms of what sort of data we wanted to extract, that it should be clear that you really can get started with reverse engineering for 101 companies very easily. And hopefully this will motivate more profound reverse engineering experiments. So thank you, and here are some pointers if you want to get in touch.